Arrive and Thrive Career Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's so nice to be here.
Oh, thank you for coming on. We're just in your workspace at WeWork. Please introduce yourself to our listeners. You know, what is it that you do? Because when I saw your profile, I was particularly excited to get you on the show. So I'm stoked you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You may be better at that introduction than me. My name is Tash Menon.
Yep.
I am an Australian woman that lives in Melbourne. I'm originally from Perth in Western Australia, have lived all over Australia, abroad in the UK, across Asia. I'm now very fortunate to run a company called MASH. I founded this business just on 5 years ago. And my now co-founder and I, we were initially housemates when I'd started the business, and then I sort of, I say that I convinced her, she says she's convinced me, but you know, it depends who you talk to on what day of the week. But in short, we have a business and a head office team that is separated across 7 cities and 2 continents, and a creative workforce that sits now at just on 230 people across 31 countries.
Wow.
Yeah, it sounds cool,
Yeah.
but it when I say this, it's been a wild ride. So, but you know, I work with some of the most incredible people from a cultural point of view, from just being genuinely nice, you know, creative, wonderful people that just sort of, I guess, inspire me on a daily basis. And I think that's kind of what makes what I do for a living. Yes, a lot of hard work at sometimes, but why I also absolutely love it. So,
So MASH is a creative agency.
we don't frame ourselves that
Cool.
way.
Yep.
So we call ourselves sort of the creative effectiveness company.
Yep.
What we mean by that is that how we actually operate is that we curate creative teams in local areas around the world, but we have a global infrastructure that sort of allows us to be the puppeteers that
Yep.
plugs and play with these different creative teams depending on what a brand requires. Why we call ourselves the cultural effectiveness company is we really truly believe that great creative insight is delivered by the people who actually live and breathe that sort of culture, that sort of life, that
Yep.
sort of country or experience, but also whatever that product or service may be. So when we build a team for a brand, it isn't just about who's on our roster, it's about who actually deeply appreciates this type of ice cream, or you know, this type of hotel,
cool.
or if it is, you know, we work with some very large entertainment companies. You know, with those entertainment companies, are these the type of people who would actually utilize their streaming services? It's a combination, as we kind of always say, of mindset, skill set, and experience,
Yep.
rather than just saying, we're going to pull together a team of strategists and art directors and creative directors. It's actually looking at what is the cultural insights and the type of people that are best suited for really solving this creative problem or elevating this
Yep.
creative work, rather than just by going, okay, what are the skill sets on LinkedIn that are required to actually service what this brand needs?
Yeah, love that.
Does that make
Yeah.
So it's a very I kind of always say, if someone, you know, if you were to describe what MASH is in one word, is we curate.
Yep.
And we curate to really enable or empower individuals to have the ability to choose work that fulfills them in what they're doing. But the plus side for a client that we're working with, they have a fully bespoke, curated, you know, team sitting as an extension of their own team. It's not an agency that's just servicing their requirements. We actually embed people to sit as part of their internal structure. You know, and we had I think I mentioned just before we got on this call, I was on a whirlwind trip across Asia last week, meeting with mashers and clients and people that we've, you know.
Is that what the people are called?
Mashers,
The
yes,
mashers.
yeah.
Love that.
So
Yeah.
our mashers, I always say in a company like ours, when you have 200 plus people who are all independent, we truly have to mean that we're only as good as the people we work with, because unlike a company that may hire that headcount all full time, the fact is every one of our mashers, if they are provided an opportunity to work on a project, they can say no. So when a brand works with us, the team that we've curated, every single person is one, choosing to be there, and two, have been handpicked. So that quality and caliber of the team is really bespoke to solving a particular, providing a solution, solving a problem, or elevating sort of the cultural effectiveness of that brand. So it's for that reason alone, just, when we start sort of navigating through sort of our community of mashers, I mean, when I started the business, there was me and 6 others that were individuals I'd worked with in a previous life, and
other freelancers. And
4 were freelance.
Yeah.
2 were sitting on the fence of about to go out on their own, and I was starting this business, and the idea of it, which there's been sort of key threads of our purpose that have stayed absolutely true from day dot, and that was where unlike a traditional agency or a traditional consultancy, where even if you are a freelancer, you have no rights. Essentially you come in, you wear the label of that brand on your shirt, you represent them, you work the hours that you're set to work, you probably don't get paid on time. These were a lot of the things. I spent about a year freelancing myself, experiencing a lot of things like this myself, and I went, okay, but you actually, and this was, as we said before we jumped on, MASH was started a year and a half before the pandemic. So this idea of being a freelancer actually had a bit of a negative perception, particularly here in Australia. I used to get asked questions going, oh, so you work with freelancers, are these people that can't get jobs, or are they living in Bali 6 months of a year, and
are they just working 5 hours a week?
Totally. There was this perception that a high performing team can't necessarily be built out of individual consultants. And so from the very early days, we set some sort of I want to say really tight guardrails in terms of what was freelancing and what was mashing. And, we have this internal sort of line saying there's freelancing and then there's mashing. And what we mean by that is the process of how we've cultivated this community, the process of how we've, I guess, organically grown to where we are today and where we're looking to evolve from here, has really been focused on staying true to this purpose of empowering the creative world that we live in to work for themselves.
Yep.
And by doing that, we've sort of almost built this prototype of profile of the type of masher that we work with, even though they're situated across 31 countries. Vast majority have had anywhere between 10 and 14 years experience.
Yep.
But again, experience is not necessarily a reflection of what someone's sort of creative caliber or capacity is. What we really look for is people who have driven impact in new audiences, and that's where a lot of brands come and speak to us, because it's not just about creating a campaign or, doing something beautiful. It's about engaging a new audience through the really cluttered world that we live in today. And to engage and to reach a new audience, it's so important that we as humans realize that we're all consuming and making decisions in a much less linear way than we used to. So having that diverse perspective in your team is critical. And I guess that's still to this day, 5 years ago when I started, when the business started to grow and we started, getting referred business, we made a decision then we weren't going to advertise for freelance talent. And to this day, we've still never advertised. We've only brought in talent, or we've brought in people to join our community as and when demand has, required that.
Yep.
And so we work on a referral-only basis. And in that, a lot of young businesses, traditionally when you're in this position where maybe you're looking to grow a little bit more, or you're looking to double down on how you be more effective in what you do, the first thing they would usually invest in is some sort of growth or salesperson or business development person. Ours was the polar opposite. The first person we brought into our business in, a capacity other than myself in that full-time space was someone to help manage the community. And the reason for that, for me, it was, a lot of the decisions that I've made and continue to make, I sort of put this filter of common sense around it and going back to, staying true to our purpose, looking at how great work is created, looking at what clients or brands we're looking at. If you don't look after that community, they won't look after you. And that was where we brought in a community manager very early on. And now we have an arm of the business that looks after that entirely. And that's everything from referrals, recruitment, events. We're starting a learning and development arm.
Oh, wow.
Which for me is I'm super excited about that because I think that's, again, if you choose to work for yourself because you're in that position to do so, why shouldn't you get the perks that you could get if you were, working in a large corporation somewhere,
Yeah. So please run us back to, the moment where you were like, I just need to start this thing called MASH. Because I love that, how you said before, like, sometimes the decisions that we make, they're no longer linear. And
I definitely haven't had a linear career path. We were talking before we jumped on about, you were saying like how you and your dad have very similar roles. Like my brother and my dad are basically carbon copies of one another. I kind of was a bit of a dark horse and did my own sort of thing forever really. And I was always I've always taken on the approach with whatever work I do, I've wanted to do good. And what I mean by that is I think I was brought up to, at least if you do something, make sure you put your best foot forward. And I think regardless what my career path sort of was prior to starting MASH, that was the consistent thread. And I think that's where I was also, though, a bit challenged because I was highly ambitious. I needed to get punched in the face a few times, if that makes sense. Like I did need that, and I did. That's a different story. But I think it was just one of those things where, for me,
as in like a reality check.
Reality check. And I think there's
not actual like
not actually work. Punches in the face. No, I'm too. I'm like if somebody. No, definitely not. No, I mean, I think there's a perception, particularly if you've grown up in Australia, like with tall poppy syndrome, or this appetite or appeal, maybe not to be too big for your own boots. Do you know? And
stay in your lane.
Yeah. When the first couple of weeks of the idea of MASH, and I'll go back to answering that question, but I remember saying to somebody about the idea of what I wanted to create, and the way I explained it to him was, I've spent 15 years of my career abroad and my family are here in Australia, but, I'm really interested about what's happening in Asia. Like I want to be able to build this business in the world that I do know, which was working with creatives, working, in that sort of sphere, that didn't have borders. I didn't want to have a roof over my head. I wanted to be able to have roots in Australia. I wanted to be able to still work in Europe because that's where I'd spent a large proportion of my career. But I saw there being great opportunity in Asia just because of the vastness of perspective and culture and diversity in such a close proximity. And it was interesting, I guess obviously as well being of Indian descent, I've gone back to India every second, third year of my life, and seeing how Western brands were infiltrating within these markets.
Interesting.
I was fascinated by it. It was just pure curiosity within that. And I said to this guy, this is what I want to create. And he basically turned to me and we were joking about it, but he's like, oh, Tash, well, maybe you should learn to water your backyard first. And I looked at him and I kind of just went, well, you must have a pretty small backyard if that's how you're thinking. And it just really bugged me because that attitude is something that I'd faced a lot and my whole life. And
continue to face as well?
I not as much, because I think the way that I now sort of play, I sort of always frame it as how I play, but the way I now play is that I look to surround myself with people with similar mindsets. So, and I think that's something that comes, with maturity and making a lot of bad mistakes and, learning from those mistakes. But I find myself in a position now, I'm less around that sort of thinking because I choose not to be. And I'd rather be around people who, not necessarily, there's this perception of, over the top optimism. That's not it at all. It's more so being clear and transparent as to why you're doing something, but finding and being around the right people who help support that and nurture that, but also will tell you when you need to step back in your lane for the right reasons. Yeah. And, when MASH was started, the short of it was I took a job for the wrong reasons. I was in my early 30s. I had moved back to Melbourne for this role, and on paper it looked really good. It was that kind of role that you want to get before you buy a house in a year or two, or an apartment, because
the setup job,
and I was kind of like, all right. And in my own head, I genuinely said, I'm going to do this role for a year. Yep. I'm going to save a heap of money, and then after that, I'm going to get my apartment, and then I'm going to start this business. And I've always had a really, whether it is a knack, or I've realized now, I think it's just my approach of how I make decisions. And we joked about this when we sat down to talk. It's either a hard left or a hard right, really fast. Yep. And that's been consistent my whole life. When things are good, it's good. When things are bad, it's sharp.
Handbrake.
Yeah, completely. And I walked into this company. Every aspect, I was the wrong person for this role. Every aspect. It was a senior leadership role. And it was the first time in my life people would be like, how's work? And I just went, I don't want to talk about it, because I just didn't enjoy it. But, the way the universe works, I only lasted 3 months there, and I left because it really wasn't the right cultural fit, but it really shone a mirror for me on what was important in terms of what my career, what my personal and professional life needed to look like. And basically, it was it was an unfair dismissal case. But I won that. But then at the same time, it was one of those things where soon after that happened, basically 20 minutes after that happened, I basically went to a cafe and registered MASH.
Wow.
And I still remember the cafe. It was hilarious because I got into my car and I was like so shaken about it. And I was near Hawthorne, I think it was. I didn't even know what was around Hawthorne. And it was a churros, chocolate store. Yeah. I ordered some churros. I'm like, I don't even like churros. And anyway, so I registered MASH knowing that I had this idea of this business, and knowing how unempowered I felt in that role. I really wanted to set out to empower others who I knew had the same sort of intention of doing great work as I did, and were good at what they did, but maybe weren't in a situation where they were set up to do that. What I found was, as soon as I set that up, having never freelanced, but having worked with creative freelancers, I'd built a career where I was, engaging multiple agencies throughout my career, that you would identify key people in these roles. And in these roles, they weren't looking to climb the ladder to get that top seat. They were in that spot just about to go out on their own, or they were looking to sort of stay in there. And I was like, well, what if you started... the way I first described it to somebody was like, think of the Avengers. If you had like little dream teams of people who have specialist skills, specialist expertise, all coupled together, and then literally packaged up, tied in a bow, and plugged into a business. Like, it's a far more efficient way to drive something. And that was the sort of agenda and intention. And I then moved back home for 10 months, which was a pivotal point in MASH and my life, because I was, humbling. It's probably
How wild is it when you move out and you move back in with your folks?
Well, I moved out when I was 18, and I went to London on a one-way ticket, basically saying to my family, see you later. I was just like Miss Independent, was backpacking through Russia, like all this sort of stuff. Did some crazy things in that era of my life. And then my younger brother, when this all happened, and I was on the phone to him, he's a really wise kid to this day. And I just said to him, I was like, I've had this idea for this business. I'm thinking about doing it, but, I've taken this lease out on this apartment. And he's just like, Natasha, like, stop talking, shut up. He's like, seriously, he's like, you've been talking about this idea of doing your own thing for longer than I remember. He's like, this is the first time in 15 years you've been in the same city as mum and dad. They live 20 minutes from where you are. Pack up your apartment, move in with them. If anything, it's going to set you up to basically make this successful.
Wow.
So went to mum and dad's that night, told dad, and he was like, yeah, sure. Told mum, and she's like, how long are you going to be here for? So, yeah, that was an interesting, and that was it was an era of my life where, the age I was at, a lot of my friends were getting married, a lot of baby showers. And I spent a year where I missed all of that. Like I think there was like 4 or 5 weddings that I didn't get to go to because they were overseas. I only just moved back to Australia, so a lot of my close friends were overseas. And I at the time I didn't see it as a sacrifice. It was more so this just had to work. Yeah. That was basically in my own head. I was like, this just has to work.
Your back was against the wall. And you were like, this is my moment, or?
I think it's a really hard one to describe, but I think going back to sort of explaining earlier on how my personality, so to speak, like I've always been very driven, and I always wanted to do good. I've always been in a bit of an achieving sort of mindset. I've been competitive, like that's who I am, and I don't think competitiveness need be a dirty word. It can be a really positive thing if nurtured in the right way. And I think for me, where I was sick of it, was I just finally wanted to set myself up in the way I wanted to set myself up. And I was finding the structures or opportunity I was getting through traditional institutions, or how that would look, just wasn't servicing that for me. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a really fruitful entrepreneurial career working for somebody, so you can find great bosses and great companies that give you that ownership and empowerment. But I was just not finding my spot. And, I always say now, even though it's only been 5 years, the most positive thing for me personally that's come out of MASH, and that's outside of what the business has done, outside of the amazing team I work with and the experience that I've had of that, it actually gave me the platform to become the person that I wanted to become. And that's not in light of what that is as a job title, but we again spoke about this before we jumped on here, but it just really broadened how I needed to grow personally. And that's just not, I think a lot of people have this perspective of self-development or personal growth is you do that for a job. You need to do that to become a leader. And like my whole way of living has always been, yes, work plays an integral component of my life, but it's only one part of it. And if you can find a way to grow yourself whilst also being challenged or nurtured in a professional sense, in a personal sense, and whatever other elements there are, it's a great journey to be on, and I feel that for me now is the part that I love the most about what I do. Because if I look back 5 years ago, and even my own father said to me, I think it was last Christmas, and he said it in the most beautiful way. He had come to our house for a barbecue just before the rest of the family. He's just like, if you had told me your life looked like this, it was going to look like this 4 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. And then he walked back in. I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah, wow.
But it was just like, and I say that because there's still such a long journey to go. But I think the hardest thing is when you decide to make a decision to press the green button. It doesn't mean you need to run the world when you start a business, but whatever your intent is of why you're doing it, you've got to stay true to you. Because I think that's where a lot of people can either get jumbled up in going, oh, I've started this business and I need to be this type of entrepreneur, or I need to be this type of leader, when actually just be really honest why you've started it, and then keep that in check to just enjoy it that way.
Love that, Tash. That's so cool. Like, one of I can't remember the exact stat, but it was like shockingly low, the percentage of female founders in the creative space. Can you share a little bit about any challenges that you've noticed working in that space, how you've overcome those? And I love that. I'm assuming it's tied up in that professional and personal development piece that you were just talking about in terms of, looking at your own skill set. And I find sometimes running a business is like looking in the mirror sometimes, of going, right, can see my strengths and you can see my weaknesses, and you have to really lean into those.
Totally. I it's really interesting because I guess my whole life I've kind of walked into rooms, and doesn't matter what room I walk into, I usually stand out like a sore thumb. So whether I think about it from what I do in terms of industry, whether I think about it in terms of my age, in terms of, I guess through MASH I've had some wonderful opportunities to meet with some incredible business leaders. And again, you almost at some point sort of look around going, oh, okay, this is interesting. It's a very different, and I guess my perspective around whether it is age, sex, ethnicity, regardless of these boxes that society sort of look to pigeonhole us in terms of what we're capable of, and I do feel quite privileged that I think this way, because I really understand that's not something that everyone may have been exposed to, but I've never used those differentiators to be something that would mitigate or put a wall up for an opportunity. And the way that I know that may just sound easier said than done, but if I were to place energy into that, I would actually not be putting energy into the work. And I think that's where I would rather focus on, again, because there's me and then there's work. And so if I'm talking about work, and if people... There are some crazy stats out there, whether it is about raising capital or whether it's about the industry or whether it is about just women in general in leadership positions. And it's not belittling or devaluing that. That definitely ought to be a voice to help elevate that. But I guess from my personal perspective, it's about how do you elevate as a human to just be better and, take the best intent to bring others around you who share that mindset with you to do better as well. Rather than focusing on, well, yes, this is, who I am and they're around it. And hopefully by taking that approach, the question marks around whether it is age, sex, industry, diversity, whatever the case may be, get answered in the same approach. Is that
cool answer?
Well, it's honestly true, because I just, because we grew up, my dad was in the Air Force growing up, so we grew up in some proper small towns. And my brother and I were lucky because we could both run and catch a ball. So any new school we moved to, we were immediately picked, in the sporting teams.
So the
and
common ground of
totally, sport was our currency. And I think having that as it was I would love to analyze that, but just that was such a pivotal way, I think, of how we thought about ourselves, because we didn't how we looked or where we're from didn't actually play a part. It was actually what are you capable of. And again, I said it earlier, I know it is a privileged way of thinking, but it's something that I really encourage, because I think the more there's a lot of conversation, particularly about diversity and inclusion in our industry, and yet I find it fascinating that a lot of the voice pieces aren't necessarily people who are in any of those categories. So from my side, I just go, well, the focus has always just been staying true to why, and then from there, and that's what I do love what we're doing at MASH right now, from it being myself to now, this global community of people we're working with on a same sort of viewpoint. It's still small in the spec of it, but it's I think that ripple effect is exciting.
Totally. Hey, I'm mindful of your time.
Yeah.
A couple of last two things I just want to ask is if you could give us a rapid fire of 5 things that you perhaps wish you knew, or 5 things that you would share with people who wanted to start their own thing. Because I often, in the work that I do, I often hear people go, I do this, but I've always wanted to do X, or I've got a bit of a business idea. What do you think about it?
I think 5 things. Okay, that's hard. I can think of a couple.
Yeah, just go a couple. That's totally fine.
I think one of the first things I'd always encourage is that if you are, and I talk to a lot of people who are about to go out, working for themselves or considering, starting a business or so, be really clear why. Be really, really, really clear why. Because I think there's this, we all wear rose-tinted glasses around starting something, having that ownership, working from wherever, flying here, doing this, that. And yes, that is amazing, but my God, it's a lot of hard work. And, if you are in a relationship or if you are, if you've got a young family, be clear how that's going to impact them, and how do you build something that allows you to have what your life looks like and what your professional life looks like with that. To do that, and I gave the same advice to my now business partner, because she was quite unhappy in a role, and she asked me a similar sort of question, and I didn't have a really sophisticated answer, but it stayed true to how I basically make decisions now. I don't have like a one particular mentor. I feel like I probably have about 30, and what I mean by that is whenever I'm challenged with a thought around something, so if you're thinking about going and doing something, you don't necessarily need someone there to sit you down and give you advice. But if you're considering it and you know why you want to do it, just getting a breath of like just perceptions or perspectives around, why you shouldn't will help you actually come up with what your answer is. And I live by that. Like I probably frustratingly so, I think even my partner knows that whenever I'm like confused about something, I'll just go talk to 3 or 4 people. And I've sort of learnt through that process how to, how to find an answer. And if I were to say a third one, I think the most important thing is, and it's sometimes you've really got to remember this if you're growing a business, or even just starting a business, but you do this because it's an extension of yourself. So it's got to, I don't want to sound cliche that it's got to be fun, but you've got to enjoy it. And, there'll be parts that you don't enjoy. There's always skills or things that we all don't like doing. But, be clear on what it is, as you said up front, about what you like, what you don't like, where's your strengths, where's your weaknesses, and surround yourself with those people that can help complement that. Because I think that's the second that you stop enjoying it, and that's something that I've always been really clear with myself. I'm like, okay, if it gets to a point where I'm not actually enjoying it, I've got to really consider why I'm doing this. And so that for me is probably the baseline of it all, because like life's too short otherwise. If you're putting all this into something, then you've got to enjoy it.
Yeah, love that. And last question before we let you go, and it's just a question that we ask all of our guests, our dear Dan Lenardi, who founded this project with me. So I'll just play his intro music to all of him.
Taco.
I'm roaring.
He used to call me Taco.
Amazing.
Still don't know why.
I'm brewing. Yeah, I'm soaking it up.
Taco, just thought I'd drop in with a little late night surprise for you.
I'm not sure if you can hear the sizzling. I'm just sort of stewing on that.
Thoughts? I'm roaring.
So, what are you roaring about, Tash?
I'm doing a road trip through Darwin to Broome in December, which I'm pumped about. Yep. So we're just, this was a trip. So I love a road trip. Yep. Like always been a massive fan of a road trip. Yeah.
Love road trips.
So.
Only way to travel.
Yeah. So that is something right now that I'm like seriously pumped about because I'm just excited to explore that part of the world. I haven't actually spent much time there. Other than that, I'm still a bit obsessed. This is really basic, but I had this char kway teow noodle dish last week. Okay. When I was with my team in Singapore, and it was literally life-changing.
Cool.
It was just from a hawker hall that I've gone to before, but I sort of snuck in and got a bowl before I flew back out, and I just went, oh my God, that's just made my whole trip. Genuinely. Awesome. Yeah. So I don't know. Food generally plays a pretty big part of my life. So that would be that. And then travel would be a second. So just thinking out loud, just because I was planning this trip last night, it's top of mind. And then I haven't had lunch yet, so I'm a bit hungry. So I was thinking about those noodles.
Oh, man, well, I'm going to let you go. But, thanks so much for coming on the show. Is there a way that people can see your updates and check out MASH further?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to please drop me an email. But otherwise, our website, thisismash.com, has everything. We're actually in the process of revamping that a little bit. So in the next month, definitely do check it out. But yeah, lines are always sort of open with us. So I'd love to always just meet really interesting people and have a chat with it.
Awesome. Thanks, Tash.